The moment your spouse turns you into the punchline of a joke, the marriage isn't in danger. It may already be over. My name is Ethan Walker, and I learned that lesson on a warm Saturday evening in suburban Texas while standing 10 feet away from my wife and listening to a room full of people laugh at me. The backyard looked like something out of a home improvement magazine. String lights hung above the patio. Country music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker near the pool. The smell of smoked brisket and grilled corn floated through the air. Friends stood around holding cold drinks, talking about work, vacations, and their kids. It was Melissa's 38th birthday party, and for weeks she had planned every detail. She loved hosting. She loved being the center of attention even more. I was carrying a tray of burgers from the grill when I heard someone ask her a simple question. It was her friend Amanda. They were sitting around a fire pit with several couples. Amanda laughed and nudged Melissa's shoulder. Come on, be honest. After 12 years of marriage, do you two still act like newlyweds? The group chuckled. Melissa took a sip from her wine glass and leaned back in her chair. The firelight reflected in her eyes. Then she smiled. Not the smile she used to give me when we were younger. Not the smile from our wedding photos. This one was sharper, colder, designed for an audience. Honestly, she said, I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss Ethan. The laughter exploded instantly. Loud, effortless. The kind of laughter people release when they think they're hearing the funniest thing all night. Someone nearly spilled their drink. Another person slapped their knee. Even Amanda doubled over laughing. And Melissa laughed the hardest of all. I stopped walking. The tray suddenly felt heavier in my hands. Nobody noticed I was standing there. Nobody noticed I had heard every word. Or maybe they did. Maybe that made it funnier. For a few seconds, I just stood still. The music continued playing. Ice clinked inside plastic cups. Somewhere across the yard, Melissa's golden retriever chased a tennis ball through the grass. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. But something inside me shifted so quietly that nobody could hear it. The strange thing about humiliation is that it doesn't always arrive like a punch. Sometimes it arrives like a door quietly closing. I didn't feel angry at first. I didn't feel the urge to argue or defend myself. I just felt tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with work or age. The laughter slowly faded as people moved on to other conversations. I placed the tray on a nearby table and walked back toward the grill. Nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. Nobody even looked concerned. To them, it had been harmless fun. A joke. That's what people call cruelty when enough people are laughing. As I stood beside the smoker, I watched the flames flicker beneath the metal grate. Melissa was still entertaining the group. Her hands moved dramatically as she told another story. More laughter followed. Watching her from across the yard, I remembered the woman I married. The woman who used to sit beside me on cheap apartment furniture while we ate takeout and dreamed about the future. The woman who once held my hand in a hospital waiting room when my father passed away. The woman who used to look at me like I mattered. Somewhere along the way, that woman disappeared. Maybe gradually. Maybe years ago. Maybe I had simply refused to notice. The sky darkened as evening settled over the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on across the street. A warm breeze moved through the trees. I checked the temperature on my phone. 82 degrees. Perfect weather. Perfect house. Perfect lawn. Perfect party. From the outside, everything about my life looked successful. But appearances can hide a lot of damage. Melissa glanced toward me for a moment. Our eyes met across the yard. She smiled and lifted her glass as if nothing had happened. As if I were supposed to laugh too. I smiled back. Calm. Controlled. Polite. Then I looked away. Because what Melissa didn't know was that this wasn't the first time she had turned me into entertainment. And what nobody at that party understood was that the moment they laughed, something inside me finally stopped trying to save the marriage. The party finally ended a little. After 10 that night, the last SUV disappeared down the street. The music stopped, and silence settled over the neighborhood. Empty paper plates sat on patio tables. Half-melted ice floated in coolers. The backyard that had been filled with laughter only an hour earlier now felt strangely hollow. Melissa walked through the kitchen carrying a stack of dishes while humming to herself. If she felt any guilt about what happened, she hid it well. I stood at the sink rinsing barbecue sauce from serving trays. The water ran hot over my hands. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. 12 years of marriage can teach two people how to avoid uncomfortable conversations better than strangers ever could. Finally, Melissa glanced over her shoulder. Everyone had a great time tonight, she said casually. Amanda already texted me saying it was the best birthday party she has been to in years. I nodded. That is good. She waited for more. When none came, she returned to loading the dishwasher. I could almost feel her searching for a reaction. An argument. A complaint. A wounded speech. Something she could dismiss or laugh about later. Instead, there was nothing. Just the sound of plates touching ceramic racks and the steady hum of the refrigerator. You are awfully quiet, she said after a minute. Long day. She studied me for a second. You are not upset about the joke, are you? There it was. Not an apology. Not concern. Just curiosity. Like a scientist checking whether an experiment worked. I dried my hands with a kitchen towel and looked at her. Which joke? A small smile appeared on her face. Oh, come on, Ethan. Everybody was laughing. Exactly. She rolled her eyes. You are too sensitive sometimes. Then she turned away and continued cleaning. The conversation ended there. At least for her. Around midnight, Melissa went upstairs to bed. I remained in the kitchen for another hour with the lights dimmed low. The house felt different than it had that morning. Not broken. Just clearer. Sometimes clarity arrives after years of confusion. Sometimes it arrives in a single sentence spoken at exactly the wrong moment. I opened my laptop and sat at the dining room table. The screen illuminated the dark room with a pale blue glow. For several seconds, I stared at the desktop before clicking on a folder hidden behind ordinary work documents. The folder had a simple name. Enough. Inside were dozens of files. Screenshots. Notes. Dates. Small moments collected over nearly 2 years. Not because I was planning revenge. Not because I was building a case. At least not at first. I started saving them because I thought I was losing my mind. Every sarcastic comment. Every public embarrassment. Every story where I became the joke. Every gathering where Melissa found a way to earn a laugh at my expense. The files told a story I had been refusing to see. One screenshot showed a text message Melissa sent to one of her friends after a dinner party. Ethan spent 20 minutes explaining lawn equipment tonight. Somebody save me. Another showed a group chat where she joked about my weekend fishing trips. There were dozens more. None individually devastating. Together, they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The strange thing was that I could still remember when Melissa used to defend me. Years ago, if someone criticized me, she would immediately stand beside me. Somewhere along the way, that loyalty had disappeared. Maybe success changed her. Maybe comfort did. Maybe people slowly become whoever they repeatedly choose to be. At 1:30 in the morning, I closed the laptop and walked upstairs. Melissa was asleep. Moonlight filtered through the bedroom curtains and cast soft shadows across the room. She looked peaceful. For a moment, I studied her face and searched for the woman I used to know. I could still see pieces of her, but only pieces. I quietly changed clothes and climbed into bed. Melissa shifted slightly and murmured something in her sleep before turning toward the opposite side of the mattress. The distance between us could not have been measured in inches anymore. It felt more like miles. As I stared at the ceiling, I realized something important. Earlier that evening, everyone had laughed because they thought I was the only person being humiliated. They were wrong. What none of them understood was that every joke revealed far more about Melissa than it did about me. And for the first time in years, instead of wondering how to save the marriage, I found myself wondering what my life would look like if I stopped trying. The next morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of suburban life. Sprinklers clicked across freshly cut lawns. School buses rolled through the neighborhood. Commuters backed out of driveways carrying coffee mugs and briefcases. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Inside, something had changed. I woke up before sunrise and sat alone on the back patio with a cup of black coffee. The air was cool, around 68 degrees, and the sky carried that pale blue color that only exists for a few minutes before dawn. Normally, I would have been thinking about work, project deadlines, budgets, client meetings. Instead, I found myself thinking about patterns. Human beings are creatures of habit. We repeat behaviors until they become invisible. We accept treatment we would never tolerate from strangers because it arrives one small piece at a time. Looking back, I realized Melissa had not become disrespectful overnight. The change had happened gradually. A joke here, a sarcastic comment there, a story told at my expense during dinner parties. Tiny cuts spread across years until they formed something larger. The sliding door opened behind me. Melissa stepped onto the patio wearing running shoes and athletic clothes. She looked refreshed, energized, completely unaffected by the previous night. "You are up early," she said. "Could not sleep." She stretched her arms above her head and glanced toward me. "Still thinking about that joke?" I took a sip of coffee. "Not really." She studied my face as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. Then she shrugged. "Good. Life is easier when people do not take everything personally." A few minutes later, she left for her morning run. I watched her disappear down the sidewalk. There was a time when I would have followed her inside, tried to explain how I felt, tried to repair whatever was broken between us. That morning, I stayed where I was. Later, that afternoon, I arrived at my office downtown. I worked as a senior operations manager for a regional construction company. Most days were filled with schedules, inspections, and conference calls. Practical problems. Solvable problems. Around lunch, I opened my email and noticed a message from an old friend named Ryan Foster. Ryan and I had known each other since college. We had once spent entire weekends fishing at Lake Travis and talking about life. Over the years, careers and responsibilities had pulled us in different directions, but we still checked in occasionally. His message was simple. "Hey brother, it has been too long. Want to grab dinner this week?" I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I replied yes. 2 nights later, we met at a steakhouse about 15 miles from my office. Ryan looked older than I remembered. More gray hair. More laugh lines. The kind of face that comes from actually living life instead of performing it. We spent the first hour talking about ordinary things. Work, family, sports, the economy. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me carefully. "You seem tired, Ethan." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "To me, yes." I turned my glass slowly between my hands. "Have you ever stayed somewhere long after you realized it stopped feeling like home?" Ryan did not answer immediately. He nodded once. More than once. Something about that response made me tell him the truth. Not everything. Just enough. The birthday party. The public jokes. The constant disrespect. The feeling that somewhere along the way I had become less of a husband and more of a prop in Melissa's social life. Ryan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quietly for several moments. Finally, he said something that stayed with me. "You know what the real problem is?" "What?" "You are still evaluating yourself through her eyes." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means every insult only hurts because part of you still believes she gets to define your value." The restaurant noise faded into the background. Forks clinked against plates. Waiters moved between tables. But Ryan's words stayed front and center. He was right. For years I had measured myself against Melissa's opinion, her approval, her criticism, her moods, her respect. Somewhere along the way, I had handed another person authority over my sense of worth. That realization followed me all the way home. Later that night, I parked in my driveway and sat inside the truck without turning off the engine. The house glowed softly through the front windows. Melissa was inside watching television. Ordinary, familiar, comfortable. Yet for the first time, I looked at that house and realized an uncomfortable truth. The life I was protecting so desperately might no longer exist. Maybe I had been preserving a memory instead of a marriage. And for the first time, that possibility did not scare me nearly as much as it should have. The changes started small enough that most people would have missed them. That was the point. I was not trying to send a message. I was not trying to punish Melissa. I was simply tired of carrying responsibilities that had become invisible. For years, I had handled dozens of little things that kept our life running smoothly. Scheduling maintenance appointments, managing household repairs, renewing insurance policies, organizing travel plans, solving problems before they ever reached her attention. The strange thing about being dependable is that people eventually stop noticing. They only notice when you stop. About 2 weeks after Melissa's birthday party, the first crack appeared. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was sitting in my home office reviewing project reports when Melissa walked in holding her phone. "Did you ever schedule the HVAC service?" she asked. I looked up from my screen. "No." She blinked. "No. No. Why not?" Her tone carried genuine confusion, as if the possibility had never occurred to her. I shrugged. "I forgot." She stood there for several seconds waiting for more explanation. None came. Finally, she left the room. The next day, she spent nearly an hour calling service companies herself. A week later, another moment arrived. We had plans to attend a neighborhood fundraiser on Saturday evening. Normally, I would have arranged everything. Bought the tickets. Confirmed the details. Added the event to our calendar. This time I did nothing. Saturday afternoon, Melissa walked into the kitchen looking irritated. "What time are we supposed to be there?" she asked. "I'm not sure." "Did you not buy the tickets?" "No." "Why?" Again, I gave the same answer. I did not get around to it. The frustration on her face was immediate. Not because of the event itself. Because something fundamental had shifted. For years I had functioned like a safety net beneath every aspect of our life. Suddenly that safety net was disappearing. Melissa was beginning to notice the absence without understanding the cause. The following Monday, I came home from work and found her standing in the garage beside her SUV. "The maintenance light has been on for 3 weeks," she said. "Can you take care of it tomorrow?" Normally I would have. Instead, I grabbed my briefcase and headed toward the house. "You should probably schedule an appointment." She stared at me. Seriously? Seriously. That night, she barely spoke during dinner. The silence might have bothered me once. Now it felt peaceful. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Melissa invited several friends over for wine and appetizers. It was the same group that had attended her birthday party. Around 8 o'clock, I walked into the living room carrying a glass of iced tea. The women were sitting around the coffee table laughing about something. Melissa glanced at me and opened her mouth. For a split second, I recognized the familiar look. The setup, the beginning of another joke. Then she hesitated. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The joke never came. Instead, she simply said hello and returned to her conversation. I noticed it immediately. So did she. That moment stayed with me long after her friends left. People behave differently when they sense they are losing access to someone. The next weekend, I spent Saturday morning fishing alone at Lake Georgetown. The sun reflected off the water like liquid silver. Boats drifted across the lake. Birds circled overhead. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely relaxed. Around noon, my phone buzzed. "Melissa." I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, where are you?" she asked. "Fishing." "Hey." Pause. "You did not tell me you were going fishing." "I decided this morning." Another pause. "When will you be home?" I looked across the water. "Not sure." The conversation ended less than a minute later. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I realized something important. Melissa was not upset because I was gone. She was upset because she no longer knew what to expect from me. For years, my entire world had revolved around maintaining our marriage, around keeping Melissa comfortable, around earning approval that never seemed to last. Now that focus was gone, and whether she understood it or not, Melissa could feel the difference. The truth was simple. I was not becoming a different man. I was becoming the man I had been before I started sacrificing pieces of myself just to keep someone else happy. About a month after Melissa's birthday party, something happened that confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Respect is a strange thing. Most people think they notice when it disappears. The truth is that it usually vanishes long before anyone admits it. I came home from work on a Wednesday evening and found Melissa sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone. The television was on in the background. Some home renovation show. The smell of takeout filled the room. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I loosened my tie and set my briefcase down. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. Not a huge smile, just enough for me to notice. A few seconds later, another message arrived. Then another. Her expression remained fixed on the screen. Curious. Entertained. Engaged. More engaged than she had looked during most of our conversations over the past year. Normally, I would have ignored it. That evening, something made me pay attention. Not because I suspected an affair. I did not. It was something simpler than that. I wanted to know where all her enthusiasm had gone, because it certainly was not being invested in us. During dinner, she continued checking her phone every few minutes, smiling occasionally, typing quick replies. I asked about her day. She answered with one-word responses. I mentioned a project I was managing at work. She nodded without really listening. Then another notification appeared. Instantly, she looked interested again. The contrast was impossible to miss. Later that night, she fell asleep on the couch with her phone resting beside her. I was walking through the living room on my way upstairs when the screen lit up. A preview notification appeared before the display dimmed again. It was from Amanda, the same Amanda who had laughed around the fire pit. I only caught part of the message. "Still cannot believe what you said about Ethan." I kept walking. I did not pick up the phone. I did not read the messages. But those few words stayed with me. The next afternoon, I found myself thinking about them during a meeting. then during lunch, then during the drive home. Not because I wanted to know what Amanda wrote, because I already knew. The details did not matter. The pattern did. That evening I opened the folder on my laptop again. Enough. I scrolled through old screenshots and notes. Dates. Comments. Stories. Little reminders of moments I had spent years minimizing. One memory surfaced that I had almost forgotten. 3 years earlier we attended a company Christmas party. One of my colleagues had complimented Melissa on how supportive she was of my career. Before I could respond, Melissa laughed and said, "Supportive? Ethan would probably work himself into a wall if I did not remind him to function like a human being." Everyone laughed. At the time I laughed too. Another memory followed. A neighborhood barbecue. Someone asked how we managed household finances. Melissa replied, "I let Ethan handle money because somebody has to be responsible." More laughter. Another. A family gathering. Her brother jokingly asked if I ever won arguments. Melissa answered before I could speak. Only when I let him think he did. More laughter. Looking back, I realized something unsettling. The jokes always followed the same formula. Melissa elevated herself by shrinking me. She earned social approval by making me smaller. And because I rarely pushed back, the behavior continued year after year. Around 9 o'clock that night, Melissa walked into my office. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just organizing some files." She leaned against the doorframe. "You have been spending a lot of time in here lately." "Probably." Another silence settled between us. Then she said something unexpected. "Amanda thinks you have been acting strange." I looked up. "Amanda?" "She says you seem distant." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was revealing. Amanda had noticed. Melissa had noticed. Other people had noticed. The only thing they had not figured out was why. "Maybe I am just busy," I said. Melissa folded her arms. "You used to talk to me more." For a moment, I simply stared at her. The irony was almost unbelievable. For years, I had tried to communicate, tried to explain concerns, tried to repair problems. Most of those conversations ended with jokes, dismissals, or accusations that I was overreacting. Now that I had stopped chasing connection, she suddenly missed it. "Maybe," I said quietly. Melissa waited for more. Nothing came. Eventually, she left the room. After she disappeared down the hallway, I sat alone in the glow of my computer screen. Outside, a summer storm rolled across the neighborhood. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. And for the first time, I began to understand something important. Melissa was not losing control of me. She was losing access to the version of me that had spent years seeking her approval. Those are not the same thing. And whether she realized it or not, that frightened her far more than any argument ever could. By early September, the distance between Melissa and me had become impossible to ignore. Not dramatic, not explosive, just undeniable. The house was quieter now. Conversations were shorter. The routines that once felt automatic had started to disappear. What surprised me most was how quickly I adapted. For years I had convinced myself that losing my marriage would destroy me. Instead, I found myself breathing easier with each passing week. One Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from a realtor named Denise Harper. I had met with her several weeks earlier during a lunch break. At the time, I told myself it was only curiosity. Just looking, just exploring options. Nothing more. But curiosity has a way of becoming intention when the truth becomes impossible to avoid. "Ethan," Denise said, "the property we discussed is available if you are still interested." I looked out the window of my office. Construction crews moved across a project site under a bright Texas sky. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Everything looked ordinary. Yet my heart beat a little faster. "Can I see it this evening?" I asked. "Absolutely." The house sat about 20 minutes north of town in a quiet neighborhood lined with oak trees. Nothing extravagant. 3 bedrooms. A small office. A covered back patio overlooking a greenbelt. Around 2,000 square feet. The kind of place designed for peace rather than appearances. As I walked through the empty rooms, sunlight spilled across hardwood floors. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint. For the first time in a long time, I could imagine a future without constant tension. A future where I did not spend every day trying to earn respect from someone determined not to give it. Denise talked about financing and closing timelines. I listened carefully. By the end of the tour, I told her to move forward. Driving home that evening, I expected guilt. Instead, I felt calm. Not happy. Not excited. Calm. The feeling surprised me. When I walked through the front door, Melissa was sitting at the kitchen island reviewing something on her tablet. "You are late," she said. "Had some things to take care of." She looked up. "Work?" "Something like that." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Over the past several weeks, she had become increasingly observant. Not warmer, not kinder, just more attentive. It was as if she sensed movement beneath the surface without understanding what was causing it. During dinner, she asked more questions than usual. Where had I been? How was work? Did I want to go to a charity event with her next weekend? The sudden interest felt strange. A year earlier, I would have interpreted it as progress. Now it felt more like curiosity from someone realizing a familiar door might be closing. A few days later, another unexpected moment arrived. I came home and found Melissa sitting alone on the patio. No phone, no television, no distractions, just silence. "Can we talk?" she asked. I sat across from her. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from a neighboring yard. For several seconds, she stared into her wine glass. Then she spoke. "You have changed." I nodded. "Maybe. No. Definitely." She looked directly at me. "You do not laugh with me anymore. You do not tell me about your day. You barely react to anything." Her words hung between us. Months earlier, I would have rushed to reassure her, to explain myself, to fix the discomfort she was feeling. This time I simply listened. "Do you even want to be here?" she asked quietly. The question landed harder than she probably intended. Not because it hurt, because it was honest. For the first time in years, she was asking the real question. I looked out across the yard where string lights still hung from the birthday party weeks earlier. They had never been taken down. Little reminders of the night everything changed. "I wanted to be here for a very long time," I said. Melissa lowered her eyes. Neither of us spoke after that. The conversation ended without resolution. But as I sat there watching the sun disappear behind the trees, I realized something important. Melissa was finally beginning to feel what I had felt for years. Uncertainty. And uncertainty has a way of forcing people to confront truths they have spent a long time avoiding. The conversation on the patio stayed with me for days. Not because of what Melissa said, but because of what she did not say. She never apologized for the birthday party. She never acknowledged the years of jokes. She never asked whether she had contributed to the distance growing between us. Instead, she focused on the symptom. I had changed. That was the mystery she wanted solved. A week later, the answer arrived sooner than either of us expected. It happened on a Friday afternoon. I was sitting in a conference room reviewing budgets when my phone vibrated. The caller ID showed Denise Harper. I stepped into the hallway and answered. "Good news," she said. "Everything is finalized. We can close next Thursday." I looked through the glass wall at my coworkers discussing numbers and timelines. For a moment, the noise faded into the background. "Thank you," I said quietly. After the call ended, I stood there staring out at the parking lot. Rows of trucks sat beneath a bright Texas sky. The future suddenly felt real. Not imagined. Not theoretical. Real. That evening I drove home with a strange sense of calm. The decision had already been made. The paperwork simply caught up to it. Melissa was in the kitchen when I arrived. She seemed unusually cheerful. She had cooked dinner herself, something she had not done in months. Candles sat on the dining table. Music played softly through the house. 10 years earlier, I would have viewed the effort as romantic. Now it felt different, like someone trying to repair a leak after ignoring the water damage for years. During dinner, she asked questions about my work. She laughed at stories I told. She even reached across the table and touched my hand at one point. None of it felt natural. Not because she was being insincere, because she was responding to fear instead of love. Fear changes people, sometimes temporarily, sometimes dramatically. After dinner, she suggested we watch a movie together. Halfway through the film, she leaned her head against my shoulder. The gesture should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like reading a book whose ending you already know. I did not pull away. I simply sat there quietly. A few minutes later, she looked up at me. "You seem far away." I kept my eyes on the television. "Maybe. I am trying, Ethan." Her voice was softer than usual. I nodded. "I know." She waited for more. Again, nothing came. The next morning, Melissa left to meet friends for brunch. I spent the day organizing documents, reviewing finances, and preparing for the transition ahead. Around noon, I opened the folder on my laptop one final time. Enough. Years of screenshots, notes, memories, evidence of a slow erosion that neither of us had stopped. I considered deleting everything. Instead, I copied the files onto a small external drive, and placed it in a desk drawer. Not because I intended to use it, because it represented the truth, and the truth deserved to exist somewhere outside my memory. Late that afternoon, Melissa returned home. She seemed distracted, thoughtful. While unpacking groceries, she suddenly stopped and looked at me. Amanda asked about us today. I glanced up from a spreadsheet. What did you tell her? Melissa hesitated. I told her things have felt different lately. And she lowered a carton of eggs onto the counter. She said maybe I pushed you too hard sometimes. The room became very quiet. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Out of all the people in Melissa's circle, Amanda was the last person I expected to say something like that. Melissa forced a small laugh. Can you believe that? I looked at her carefully. For the first time, I noticed uncertainty behind her smile. Not anger, not arrogance. Uncertainty. The kind that appears when a person begins questioning a story they have repeated for years. What did you say? I asked. Melissa looked away. Nothing. That answer told me everything. Because for perhaps the first time, she did not have a joke ready. She did not have a clever response. She did not have an audience. She was simply left alone with the possibility that Amanda might be right. And as I watched her standing there in the kitchen, surrounded by grocery bags and late afternoon sunlight, I realized the real shift was finally happening. Not in me, in her. The closing took place on a bright Thursday morning. By 10 o'clock, the documents were signed, the funds were transferred, and the keys rested quietly in my hand. No dramatic music. No celebration. Just a simple metal key attached to a small leather tag. Funny how something so small can represent such a large decision. After leaving the title office, I drove directly to the new house. The neighborhood was peaceful. Wind moved gently through the trees lining the street. A few retirees walked dogs along the sidewalks. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower hummed. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Empty rooms greeted me. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors exactly as it had during my first visit. The silence felt different now. Not lonely. Clean. I walked slowly from room to room, taking it all in. The office. The kitchen. The back patio overlooking the greenbelt. For the first time in years, I could picture a future that did not revolve around managing someone else's opinion of me. That evening I returned home, carrying a folder of paperwork. Melissa was already there. She sat on the couch with a blanket across her lap, pretending to watch television. The moment I walked through the door, she muted the screen. How was your day? She asked. Productive. Her eyes followed the folder in my hand. Work stuff? I paused. For a second I considered giving a vague answer. Instead, I sat down across from her. Not exactly. Something in my tone made her straighten slightly. I opened the folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. The top page showed the closing documents. Melissa stared at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. Her face slowly lost color. What is this? She asked quietly. I bought a house. The room became completely still. Outside, a car passed down the street. Somewhere a dog barked. Melissa blinked several times as if she had misunderstood what I said. You bought a house? Yes. When? Today. Another silence. Longer this time. You bought a house without telling me? I folded my hands together. Yes. She stared at me in disbelief. Why would you do that? The question hung in the air between us. Not angry, not defensive, genuine, as though she truly did not understand. I looked at her carefully. For years I had answered every question, explained every feeling, justified every concern. This time I decided to tell the truth, because I needed a place where I could think about my future. Her eyes widened. Your future? Yes. The words landed harder than I expected. Melissa looked away first. Her gaze drifted toward the dark television screen. So that is it? She asked softly. You have been planning this the entire time? I considered the question. Not the entire time. Just since I accepted that things were not getting better. She shook her head slowly. Why did you not tell me? I almost laughed at the irony. Years of warnings. Years of conversations. Years of trying to explain how disconnected I felt. Now she wanted communication. Now she wanted transparency. I did tell you, Melissa, I said quietly. 100 different ways. She looked back at me. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed completely unsure of herself. No jokes. No clever responses. No audience to impress. Just a woman sitting across from consequences she never expected to face. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. I did not think you would ever leave. There it was. The truth. Not that she thought everything was fine. Not that she believed we were happy. She simply never imagined I would stop accepting it. I nodded slowly. I know. Tears gathered in her eyes, though none fell. She looked around the living room as if seeing it differently for the first time. The furniture, the family photos, the ordinary details that once felt permanent. What happens now? She asked. I glanced toward the hallway where years of memories hung framed on the walls. Then I looked back at her. Now we stop pretending everything is okay. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The silence felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Because arguments still carry hope. This silence carried truth. And deep down, both of us knew there was no going back to the version of our marriage that existed before the night she turned me into a joke and expected me to laugh along with everyone else. The weeks that followed felt strangely peaceful. Not easy, not painless, just honest. Melissa and I continued living under the same roof for a while, but the illusion was gone. The performance had ended. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no desperate attempts to rewrite history. Instead, there was something much harder to face. Reality. One evening about 3 weeks after I told her about the house, Melissa knocked softly on the door of my home office. I looked up from my laptop. She stood there holding a small external hard drive, the one from my desk drawer. I found this while looking for a charger, she said quietly. My stomach tightened. She stepped inside and placed it on the desk between us. I watched some of it. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she sat down across from me. Her eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, from reflection. I had forgotten most of it, she admitted. The comments, the jokes, the things I said. I leaned back in my chair and waited. At first I thought you were overreacting, she continued. Then I watched them one after another. She lowered her gaze. It was not funny. Outside the office window, autumn sunlight filtered through the trees. Leaves drifted across the backyard. The season was changing. So were we. Melissa shook her head slowly. I kept waiting to see you fight back. Her voice cracked slightly. But you never did. I looked at the hard drive sitting between us. Years of moments compressed into a small black rectangle. Tiny pieces of evidence documenting the gradual collapse of respect. I loved you, I said quietly. People do strange things when they are trying to protect something they love. Tears finally appeared in her eyes. This time she did not hide them. Why did you stay so long? The question surprised me. I thought for a moment before answering. Because I kept believing the person I married was still there. Silence settled over the room again. Melissa nodded as though she understood exactly what I meant. Maybe she did. A few days later, I finished moving into the new house. The process was simple. A moving truck. A few friends helping with furniture. Boxes stacked in empty rooms waiting to be unpacked. On my first night there, I sat alone on the back patio with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset disappear beyond the trees. No television. No tension. No feeling that I needed to earn my place in my own life. Just quiet. Around 8 o'clock, my phone vibrated. A text message from Melissa. Not an argument. Not a plea. Just a single sentence. I am sorry for turning you into someone people could laugh at. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I set the phone down without responding immediately. Some apologies arrived too late to repair the damage. That does not make them meaningless. It simply means they belong to a different chapter. Several days later, I finally replied. Thank you for saying that. Nothing more. Nothing less. Winter arrived slowly that year. The holidays came and went. Life moved forward the way it always does. One afternoon, months later, I ran into Amanda at a grocery store. We exchanged polite conversation near the produce section. Before leaving, she hesitated. For what it is worth, she said, Melissa talks about you differently now. I smiled faintly. People learn. Amanda nodded. Some lessons are expensive. As I walked back to my truck carrying 2 grocery bags, I thought about that statement. She was right. The most expensive lessons rarely involve money. They involve people, trust, time, respect, the things we assume will always be available until they are not. Looking back, the moment that changed everything was never really about a joke at a birthday party. It was about a choice repeated so many times that it became a habit. Every laugh at my expense, every public insult disguised as humor, every moment where respect was traded for attention. Those choices built a wall neither of us noticed until it was too high to climb. Melissa thought she was losing a husband when I left. The truth was different. She lost him long before that. She lost him one joke at a time. And by the time she finally understood what those jokes cost, the man who spent years asking to be valued was already gone.